In this series finale, we're going to go ahead and apply the finish. For the veneered back panel, I wanted to keep the sycamore nice and bright, so I'm going to brush on 4 coats of a 2-pound cut of blonde shellac. For panels like this, I like to use an oxhair brush because it lays down a heavier coat, which saves me time. After I brush the first coat on the back, I flip the panel over and brush shellac on the front side of the panel. You can see why I chose this veneer. The curls just pop when I apply the finish. It's a beautiful veneer. The good thing about using shellac is the back is already dried. By the time I got the front done, I can now flip it over and put another coat on the back. But I'm going to play it safe, and then after the second coat on both sides, I'm going to let it set overnight. If I were building this cabinet during the warmer seasons and had more time, I would have applied more than 2 coats in a day, but my shop was a bit cooler and wanted to give the shellac more time to cure before sanding. It's been 24 hours and the first couple of coats of shellac have dried, so I'm going to sand both sides of the panel using 320 grit sandpaper. Now I'm going to fill it with my hand to make sure that I got all of the dust nibs. Now I'm going to flip it over and sand the back side. I like to remove the dust using a brush. And now I'm going to brush on one more coat. Now that we've effectively sealed the surface with the first 2 coats, the third and fourth coat will go on really smooth because the surface won't absorb quite as much. So I may only have to dip the brush in a couple of times instead of the 4 or 5 times for the first couple of coats. Now I'm going to flip it and apply it to this side as well. To apply the first coat of varnish, I'm going to be using a foam brush. I'm going to soak it into the surface and flood the surface rather, and let it set for 5 minutes, come back and wipe up the excess using a paper towel. Now on the doors, after the glue dried on the door pulls, I did pillow the edges using some 180 grit sandpaper, and those are nice and sanded. Now there's a couple things you don't want to forget, and the first thing is you want to be sure to put finish on the little strips that hold in the glass panels on the doors. And I also put some blue painter's tape in the rabbet on the top panel, and that's to prevent the finish from getting on the rabbet on the inside because we're going to be gluing our French cleat, so we don't want to put any finish on that. To apply the first coat of varnish, my goal is to just flood the surface and keep it wet for 5 to 10 minutes. If I see a dry spot, I'll follow that up with more varnish just to keep it wet. I like to use a foam brush because it holds a lot of varnish, which allows me to apply the finish just a little bit faster. After about 10 minutes, I come back with a couple of paper towels and wipe down all of the surfaces to remove the excess varnish. I then give everything 24 hours to dry. After the first coat had dried, I noticed that the surfaces are really dusty, so to remove the dust nibs, I'm sanding everything with 320 grit sandpaper. To remove the dust, I first start with a brush to remove a majority of the dust. I follow that up with a paper towel that I put mineral spirits on. I give the mineral spirits just a couple of minutes to flash off before applying the next coat of varnish. For the rest of the coats, I switch over to using a folded cotton cloth since my goal is to apply thin coats of the varnish. I ended up applying a total of 4 coats of the wiping varnish, and so now what I'm going to do is use some 4-0 steel wool and some paste wax to remove any of the dust nibs that landed on the surface while the 4th coat was drying. And it's also going to give me a consistent satin sheen. I'm not looking for anything super glossy. If for some reason your surface still has a lot of dust nibs on it after the 4th coat, hit it with some 320 or 400 grit sandpaper, and on your 5th coat of finish, thin that 50-50 with mineral spirits. That way your finish will dry a little bit faster and give it less of an opportunity for dust nibs to land in your 5th coat. So that's a pretty handy little trick if you're having a lot of dust in your shop. So now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and buff the surface with the steel wool and get this thing ready to reassemble. You want to pay attention close to the edges because when you're using the steel wool, oftentimes you miss the edges. So when you look at it in the light, when the wax is fully hardened and dried and you've removed it, you'll still see it that it's shiny closer toward the edges. So just pay attention to the edges as well. I gave the wax about 10 minutes to dry and then came back with a cotton cloth to buff off all of the surfaces. With the cabinet done, I've now got enough room on my assembly table to go ahead and hit the back panel with the steel wool and the wax. I'm only going to wax one side because we'll never see the back. It'll always be up against the wall. To install the glass, I'm going to put a small bead of clear silicone around the inside on the rabbet. Making sure not to put too much on there so it doesn't squeeze out. And now I've already cleaned the glass with some glass cleaner. Again, while I have access to it outside of the door, just makes it a little bit easier. I'm just going to push it in. Make sure it's all the way seated. And now we can install the trim. I've got a pin nailer with 3/4 inch pin nails, and I'm going to shoot a few of them, probably every 3 to 4 inches all the way around. Now we can install the back panel. I made sure to orient the grain of the sycamore to look what I thought to be the best and fasten the panel into place using the pin nailer. Next, I measure for the thickness of the French cleat by measuring the depth of the back of the cabinet. I had some scrap cherry lying around from an older project that is perfect for this task, so I milled it to the required thickness. Before leaving the planer, I tested the fit to make sure it wasn't too thick. Next, I cut the board to 5 inches in width, and then tilted the blade to 45 degrees. I roughly cut the board in half, giving me both parts of the French cleat. To secure the French cleat to the cabinet, I glued it in place. I carefully applied clamping pressure, making sure not to damage the edge of the cleat. To hang the cabinet, I began by attaching the cleat to the wall. One side of the cleat I was able to hit a stud with a screw, but the other side I had to use a wall anchor since the cleat wasn't long enough. I wanted to mention that I cut the cleat that is attached to the wall 2 inches shorter than the cleat that's glued to the cabinet. And as you can see here, it allowed me to slide the cabinet to center it on the wall. With the cabinet hung, I think we can call this project complete. I love the design of the cabinet, and the curly cherry with the curly sycamore really took it to the next level. This is the first time that I've incorporated glass into a project, and I'll be using it more often, as it really allows the wood to be seen and appreciated with the doors closed. I hope you enjoyed this series, and I want to thank Popular Woodworking Magazine for working with me and allowing me to give you the plans for free. If you enjoyed this series, leave me a comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next build video.